So news just broke about Joel Embiid and the Philadelphia 76ers, and I'm a bit conflicted, and it certainly doesn't seem like this season is going to go as smoothly as a lot of people anticipated. So the new NBA season is right around the corner, and one of the most interesting teams in the league right now have to be the Philadelphia 76ers. Through the offseason, they made a major addition in Paul George, making the Sixers immediately a formidable opponent in the Eastern Conference against the Boston Celtics. Because of this new formulation of a big three, a lot of people have been formulating hot takes, believing that the Sixers can go all the way. This is their year, and it certainly seems like that is a possibility. Maximizing the window of opportunity you have with Joel Embiid by capitalizing on potentially the best version of Paul George you will receive throughout the rest of his career certainly makes a lot of sense. However, there's already seemed to be a snag in the road, and that is Joel Embiid's health. Of course, this is a conversation that we have always had, but it seems as if like heading into this year, for the first time, I believe in Joel Embiid's entire tenure with the Sixers, there's actually someone in the front office who has mapped out a plan, which may be a bit controversial, but a plan nevertheless, to make sure that Embiid will be healthy by the postseason. As Daryl Morey, who is a front office executive for the Philadelphia 76ers, talked with Tim Bontemps, who works for ESPN, and mapped out a very cautious but still strategic plan for Embiid and even Paul George heading into this upcoming season that will effectively have both of them on the sideline for back-to-backs and potentially other games all throughout the year. And in the article in particular from ESPN, the plan was outlined in a way in which it should mirror a lot of what we saw from Kawhi Leonard back in 2019, which is something that Nick Nurse just so happens to be familiar with as he was coaching the Toronto Raptors back then as well, which is all very interesting. The first one being is exactly how many games does this mean that Embiid and potentially even Paul George are going to miss throughout the season. All of the dates that you see in red on your screen are all of the back-to-backs for the Philadelphia 76ers in this upcoming season. Sidebar, March is ridiculous. I don't know, the schedule makers just didn't care. They didn't give a fuck about what was going on in Philly when it comes to making this schedule. I mean, my goodness, so you see March. But if you have a hard time counting, there are 15 back-to-backs, meaning that at bare minimum, there are going to be 15 games that Joel Embiid will be sidelined. And as a sidebar, this is something that I'm not just assuming or coming to a conclusion to based off of this article. Even Joel Embiid himself has been on record by saying that more than likely, not only for this year, but for the remainder of his career, he's probably never going to participate in back-to-backs ever again, which is pretty damning. But I can only believe the only reason why Embiid is coming out and saying something that direct is because there had to have been a conversation between Embiid and some front office execs, some decision makers out in Philly that came to this conclusion, and they were very, very stern on the decision that he will no longer play back-to-backs for the remainder of his tenure with the Philadelphia 76ers. Even going a little bit deeper into the scheduling, sure, there are moments where Embiid won't play back-to-backs, but there's also stretches of games where even when there's not a back-to-back, they have like the Sixers playing 4 games in like 6 or 7 nights. It's actually pretty ridiculous. Like they'll have the Sixers playing the 2nd, the 4th, the 6th, the 8th, the 10th. Actually, I think that's how it is in the early stages of the year, where they have the Sixers playing every other day for like 7, 8 nights in a row, where they're playing 5 games in like 8 or 9 nights. It's actually pretty ridiculous, which I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm somewhat concerned. I do believe it's a really great idea, especially for an organization and a franchise that is trying to accomplish what they set out to about a decade ago, and that is win a championship. And the only way that they can honestly do so, obviously, is with Embiid being as healthy as he can possibly be, which more than likely means that they have to take precautionary measures such as this, and it all makes sense. I also applaud them as well, because this is a conversation that, in all honesty, should have happened like years ago. I don't know why Embiid is still playing back-to-backs this deep into his career when it is very, very clear that he just doesn't need to be doing so. And I do believe possibly the biggest win, he's won an MVP, made all NBAs, he's considered one of the greatest players in the NBA right now. It's already done. We know who Embiid is. The bigger question is he going to be properly prepared for postseason play? But on the flip side, man, I'm not gonna hold you. Gonna be kind of tough out there in that Eastern Conference, man, because that conference has gotten so top heavy, with the Knicks now inserting themselves in the conversation. The Bucks have retooled a lot of their roster. The Celtics are the Celtics. But the variable that I fear that they're not taking into consideration isn't just Embiid's health, it is the remainder of the roster. Is it competent and good enough to withstand going stretches and games, especially in March? Because March is a doozy. Can this team sustain a level of excellence that puts them in standings to where they can make a deep postseason run? In all honesty, I think it is somewhat naive to compare it to what we saw with Kawhi in the Toronto Raptors. I understand the plan and the premise on the surface. It makes sense to map it out like that. That year, Kawhi, he didn't play any back-to-backs. He actually missed a little bit more games than that, and he only played 60 games. As a sidebar, back then, obviously the rule was not set in place to where if you miss that many games, you won't be able to select for MVP status, nor All-NBA, or any other end of the season awards, which I do do believe at this point in Embiid's career, they clearly just don't care about that at all. I think a lot of that decision was easier to be made once he won an MVP 2 years ago. And MVPs, all NBAs, a lot of those conversations, probably Embiid is going to be removed for the foreseeable future. And I think they're okay with that. But going back to the correlation between this Sixers team and what the Raptors did back in 2019, the reason why it's a bit different is because that Raptors team was very, very, very talented, like very stacked. And the fact that they were able to run off, I believe, like 55 or 58 games, even when Kawhi had missed that much basketball, is further proof on how talented that team is. The fact that the Sixers are heading into this season and telling themselves, not only is Embiid going to be on this regiment, but potentially Paul George as well, that's where things get a little shaky and scary for me. I understand they're probably going to interchange the back-to-back games that they're going to be missing out on, and so obviously having both of them not being available isn't ideal and isn't optimal, but both PG and Embiid missing around 20 to 25 games in this upcoming season is going to be more damaging than I think a lot of people are alluding to. I do believe that this will inevitably be the downfall of them, and I'm not going to sit here and say they're not going to make the playoffs or anything like that. I still think they're going to be 4th or 5th seed. More than likely, this means that in the second round, you're going to have to face the Boston Celtics. Albeit, I understand the premise is that you want Embiid to be healthy, and so regardless if you have to face the Celtics in the second or third round, it doesn't really matter because that's a team you have to beat anyway. Really don't matter because the premise is to make sure that Embiid is there when they do match up with him. I do believe you're trying to maximize the window of what this success is supposed to look like in the playoffs. Seeding is going to matter moving forward in the Eastern Conference way more than it did in prior years. And even speaking about what postseason seeding looks like, I think that many people tend to forget how great Kawhi had to play in the playoffs because they didn't have home court advantage against the Milwaukee Bucks in the conference finals, or even how well he had to play in the second round against the Philadelphia 76ers, where he had to have one of the greatest game-winning shots we've ever seen in playoff history for them to win that series as well. And I think people still tend to forget that even when they got to the finals, regardless if you like it or not, and I know my Raptor fans are not gonna like to hear this, but part of the reason why they won that series is because Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson were not fully healthy and not available throughout that entire series. So there were so many variables that were at play besides just Kawhi Leonard's health and availability that I think a lot of people tend to overlook when going down this path. Even with all of that yapping that I just did, I have to say, I think that this is probably the only option that the Sixers have at this point in time. They don't really have the pieces. They don't have the talent to surround Embiid with to make sure that this team is so well-rounded, so well-versed that he can miss out on 20, 25 games and they can still run through a lot of the Eastern Conference. I do believe there's still going to be struggles. They're going to be dropping and seeding and standing. And I can easily see the Sixers in a very peculiar situation to where they don't have home court advantage in any of these series heading into the postseason, which could also be very, very scary. But I do believe it is the right step in the right direction. Embiid has won his MVP. He has proven to the world that when he's healthy and available, he's one of the greatest players the league has ever seen. And that's something that is undeniable. At this point, we just want to see it in the postseason. So prioritizing who he is in the playoffs in contrast to the regular season, which at this point may not matter as much. I mean, it ain't even a May. It clearly doesn't. Is certainly a direction that I think everyone should be prepared for. But yo, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How will this affect the Philadelphia 76ers in a much more competitive Eastern Conference? And also make sure you hit the subscribe button and notification bell to be updated on more NBA news heading into the upcoming season. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.